It was the emergence of new talent. Indeed. Honestly, Muyang didn't have high hopes. He firmly believed that apart from the undead he had created, those in his territory were just an assortment of people. The speed of their growth was slow compared to Muyang's, and if this continued, he felt certain that they wouldn't be a big help. However, he brought many citizens in order to increase his lord's skill ranking and to rule over them a bit easier. Anguish's patron, Gremory, the demon king of the 27th Legion. In order to get a glimpse of the two secrets, he needed to do so. The path for Muyang to become a demon king himself. In order to become a powerful thorn, he needed to expand his territory. That was all. As a matter of fact, it wasn't an exaggeration that Muyang had no hope in them. However, I am Erand. Lord, I will show you my skills. I am Garwan. My lord. I will surprise you. Before fighting, everyone greeted Muyang. Their eyes were filled with vigor. In addition to the 500 Dakibis and 20 humans, 300 others who had lived as slaves in the arena volunteered. A total of about 800 participants that were overflowing with fighting spirit. Did they enjoy fighting? However, that didn't seem right. Maybe not for the Dakibis, but the majority of the slaves were weak. They gave their will to the dogs. However, that image was completely different now. The will to fight. Their fighting spirit shone in their eyes. They were merely hoping that Muyang would look at them. Do they want compensation or status? Surely they had something to gain from fighting. Since Muyang had promised they would be treated well for getting good results. Expanding his territory, increasing the population. In order to deal with them effectively, leaders were needed. However, that didn't seem to be the only thing. I suppose if I watch I'll know. It may have been because of Ogre's words, but in any case he wanted to watch them more. Even though he wasn't knowledgeable, he was able to understand that their lord Muyang didn't simply put them together. He wasn't a good guy, and he was far from having a kind or caring personality. However, there was one thing. There was one thing that was imprinted in everyone. His movements swept through everything. He was like a typhoon. In addition, there was something unusual about those gathered around him. Muyang just moved, but they all naturally followed him. Why was that? Because he is a leader. That was it. He was gifted with the fate of a great leader. Great leaders were born with the power to rule. And he didn't think this would end at just this simple territory. Even if he didn't wish for it, he would soon be crowned as king. Although the situation ended up this way, it wasn't easy for other species to live together in harmony. No one was willing, and it was considered taboo. This was because the lifestyles and behavior of the tribes were not all the same. However, Muyang accomplished it. His overwhelming charisma made it possible. If he really became king, they might experience a world that they had never seen before. His heart raced. His rule was something that the Dakibis wished for, and the 2,000 arena slaves held no hostility towards his rule. In this situation, which was unseen and unheard of, the humans were in a state of half-doubt. However, they had to fight and prove themselves to survive. It was a situation where there was no other way but to fight to avoid being swept away in the fierce wave and endure the struggle. My sword is exclusively for the sake of the king. Of course, for Baltan the territory guardian, Muyang was already the king. And in order to receive the qualification as the king's knight, he had to win at any cost. Ha! Siohan stifled a growing smile. An ice Dakibi with an evolved Dakibi's form, a Duaxini. Although he managed almost 20,000 Dakibis, he still participated in this match. This was because he had to finish things with Baltan. However, that aside, he couldn't hold himself back because his body itched to do this. It's fun. It's really fun. His mouth itched. If he could, he wanted to laugh out loud. Their had gotten so much stronger after going outside for a while. Siohan the Duaxini was able to tell. Now he couldn't be a match for him. There's no way of knowing how much stronger he will get. His steep growth rate was not normal. But if he was then of course he should be so. He must lead the goblins by accomplishing what could not be done by anyone and by showing them That was why he was their master. However, what of the dwarves? Dwarves were famous for being a stubborn race. They didn't really follow others. They didn't trust or give their affection easily. However, he came leading hundreds of them. The image of in their eyes dared them to think of a hero. For them to worship and naturally follow him was indeed due to presence. Dear are you trying to become king? I will give my life to help you. If became a king, this territory would become a kingdom. However, was greedy and trying to put together all the species. In order to always aid in the front lines, he needed to gather the scattered Dakibis and show their strength. Has proved his qualifications. Now it's our turn. Tiohan cried out. Ahum. 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 The 500 Dakibis that were participating in the tournament shouted in excitement. They also knew Siahan's sincerity. They'd become aware of what he saw and felt. That they couldn't lose. They'd risk their lives for this fight. It was intense. No, calling it intense was not enough. The feeling of meeting a lifelong enemy. Also, the shape of that fight somehow resembled Myung. Isn't this fun? It hasn't been all that long, but already they follow you. Myung was silent. Honestly, he still didn't understand. In the end, what they wanted to resemble was Myung himself. There really wasn't much shown by him. The times when he was absent were more often. Spending a lot of time together isn't everything. All they needed was just a little hope. Are you saying I gave them hope? Although this place is on the outskirts, strictly speaking, it's a place where the demon gods rule. The Dakibis and the other species are bound to feel uneasy every day. The fire tars too? The fire tars were top predators. Were they afraid of the demons and devils too? Ogre nodded affirmatively. It will soon become the onset of the devil's long night. In those days, even the fire tars act carefully. If even we are like that, how do you think it would be for the weaker ones? So, you're saying I'm hope? Exactly. You're changing daily. Just by looking at what you show, they can be comforted and have hope. I don't really understand. He was getting stronger, but others saw that and had hope. In another word, vicarious satisfaction. While Myung was growing at an unbelievable pace. Even when he thought of the past, there was no one who grew like he did. But to see that and have hope? Was it not a greater pleasure to cultivate one's own strength and get what one wanted? Myung couldn't understand their mentality. But somehow it was obvious. The assassin Myung, who was created to just follow orders from Wang Chunglin, was never satisfied by just looking at someone. Even when he just returned, he wanted to strengthen himself and didn't think of anyone else. On the other hand, they were following Myung's example. If their master, Lord Myung, got stronger quickly, they hoped that they too would be able to get stronger. It was only a tiny spark, but in this place even that spark was hard to find. Just by Myung's existence, it lit a fire. Myung had no idea what an amazing thing that was. And this made Ogre smile and think, now I too will have a hard time with my opponent. The simple feeling of the atmosphere changed. He didn't know what had happened in a little over 100 days. But he dared say the difference was like heaven and earth. If time continued to flow in this way, he could not even imagine. The unknown was terrifying, but sometimes it inspired motivation. All this while I've been careless with my training. I too should begin moving. Since it had even influenced Ogre, there was nothing more to say. New talent. As a matter of fact, there were appearances of those with potential. Myung didn't pay much attention. But they were the ones that were buried in opposition. Through this opportunity they spread their existence. Eren was one of these. A young dark elf. He was a male that had been defeated in the arena and turned into a slave. He'd been living in confinement in the arena for a good 5 years. Of course, he had no will and in a spirit of defeatism had thought of himself as a slave. The rank at that place was determined from the time of entry. In reality, everyone was afraid of the challenges. They'd been satisfied with the place they were staying in and refused to move to the next level. How was he different from a pig inside a cage? I'm trash that isn't even a pig. At that moment a Dakibi appeared. At first nobody noticed the Dakibi. His fights were always intense, yet he never fell. However, Erend had been watching. From the beginning to the end. The actions of the Dakibi that oddly drew his attention fascinated Erend. The Dakibi moved along. Without hesitation, he had no worries as he challenged. He gave the impression that he was just doing what he was supposed to. 5th floor, 4th floor, 3rd floor. The more he advanced, the more his fame rose. At first they didn't know who he was, but as time passed there was no one that didn't know the Dakibi's name. Everyone shouted. They were enthusiastic about the appearance of a Dakibi fighting. In other words, he had become a celebrity. Every time he fought he gained strength and won. Erend closely watched him from the beginning. He was truly an aloof warrior that didn't suit this hog pen. Erend cheered. That night, for the first time in over 5 years, he cheered. He even shed tears. He didn't know why. It was just that the Dakibi's victory moved Erend. That was it. To Erend, the Dakibi was an idol. And now, that idol was before his eyes. In a place where it seemed he could touch him if he only reached out. It can't be. Seohan. Unbelievable. The Dakibis were astounded. Seohan. The one responsible for 20,000 Dakibis had fallen. The great warrior, the victor of countless battlefields, had fallen to the floor, spewing blood. Then Erend recovered 2 sacks of daggers. He freely moved. Erend had not sustained even one injury. He had perfectly dominated Seohan. When he was a slave at the arena, it was something he could not even think of doing. But as flowers blossomed, Erend changed as he left the arena. He'd gotten stronger. And he sent Muyang a provocative look. "Pai Lord, if I win, can I ask you one favor?" Erend was no longer a pig in a pen. He wasn't trash. "What is it?" Muyang asked. And Erend answered. "Please fight me." Now Erend was a warrior. A blood-hungry warrior. At that moment Muyang's lips lifted. He now understood Ogre's words. He was disregarding them. He had no expectations about their strength. He wanted to use the dwarves' powers to prepare for the long devil's night. However, as the matchups, the fights, continued, Muyang realized that his thoughts were wrong. Seeds were sown. Just expanding the territory and becoming a demon king wasn't all. There were seeds. Seeds he didn't know what they would turn into. Muyang sowed those seeds and now he needed to cultivate and harvest them. Interesting. Would a farmer feel this way? It wasn't expected at all. That was why he was looking forward to it more. "I don't know how to fight half-heartedly. If I may be so bold, please fight with me so that there isn't one bit of regret." Erend lowered his head slightly. It was a motion that allowed Muyang to feel a unique edge of the dark elf. However, the dagger hidden within it was really something. It was far from vigor a mere slave could express. Were my perceptions really wrong? They were living creatures. Living creatures are able to bear potential anytime. Even more, they were the seeds that grew as they watched Muyang. They couldn't be puppets. Muyang turned his head. Ogre was looking at him. He spoke with his eyes. For him to enjoy the festival. "I allow it." Muyang accepted. Sush. At the same time he took out Anguish. The 20,000 people that filled the audience watched Muyang. "If you want to fight me, win. I will only acknowledge the winner." Muyang was the lord who ruled over this place. If he just accepted any challenge, his rank would be reduced. Only the one who had won all the fights could gain that qualification. I like those who fight. All the past heroes were like that. They broke through all different kinds of harsh conditions to be called a hero. And from the bottom of his heart he yearned for those heroes. If heroes weren't born but were created, he wanted to see proof. Until now, Muyang didn't give them any proper attention. He believed he needed to move alone and do everything by himself. Even now, his thoughts didn't greatly change, but what if they were also Muyang's own strength? He was planning to find out if they could be of use to him or not. He didn't care if it was Erend or someone else. But Muyang was going to acknowledge the last one standing. That one would be of leadership material who would provide him strength. Mu-young would greet them into his army, formed from both living and undead. This way Mu-young could be in the center of everything among the dead and the living. Don't forget your word. Aran's body shivered imperceptibly. Aran was excited. Mu-young was his idol and his goal. At the place where he was downgrading himself as trash and thought he was a pig in a cage, Mu-young was the only one who shined. He dreamed while he watched Mu-young fight in the arena. That he wanted to fight in the same place as him. Never, forget it. Acknowledgement. That was all. It was a funny thing. But it still felt good. On the other hand, that was enough. Aran turned his body. The arena was filled with silence. However, at this moment his attitude towards the simple fight changed. It altered. This was a battlefield. A place where they cut bones and chewed on skin. A holy battle. A fight that produced glory as it followed the law? There was nothing of the sort. Winning was everything. Mu-young didn't mention any condition besides it. Win. Survive until the end. I'm no longer a slave inside a cage. Aran lived for this day. He pledged that he would live for victories and not for losses. Plump. Mu-young sat on his seat. Continue. Their master spoke. Baltan, the guardian of a territory. Originally it was Seo-han and his fight, but the opponent changed. Aran had risen to become a new match. We weren't original citizens of this land. An old man started to talk. In silence about 20 people gathered. They all lost. Now just one, only Baltan was left. If it's now, it wouldn't be impossible to escape the demon god's territory. But I'm scared. The old man was a muscular warrior, but his appearance seemed very intimidated. It wasn't due to his loss. He was afraid of leaving the demon god's territory. Due to Heidegger, we were all kidnapped. It was Mu-young who ended Heidegger's tyranny. He had accepted them as his citizens. The violence in the past had also disappeared. And quite some time had passed since then. We grew stronger, and it shouldn't be hard to escape the demon god's territory if we decide to. To escape the demon god's territory. They could return to the crowd of people. However, was that all? I'll be honest. I am afraid of people, of humans. A deep regret was within the old man's words. All of you probably think the same as me. Others nodded as the old man spoke. They were normally weaklings. Ones that wouldn't be missed were kidnapped by Heidegger with no one to save them. These people who were gathered here at this place were the ones who were thoroughly neglected by modern society. Mu-young might not be aware or might not have put any thoughts into it, but the sorrows of a weakling were beyond one's imagination. What would have been the reason for them to naturally accept Heidegger's tyranny? It was because it was no different compared to when they were within the crowd of people from the beginning. Heidegger intelligently kidnapped those who he believed were unneeded. For the first time, we realized each other's importance by coming to this place. We learned what it was to live by helping each other. After coming to the underworld, their existing knowledge became useless. A zone of the strong. A structure where only the strong could eat up everything. The weak would only crawl on the ground. The violence of the strong was no different than the tyranny of Heidegger. They had to live each day by studying other people's faces. They had to go through a narrow path, making small strides to even make ends meet. Don't they just need to get stronger? We weren't even given a chance to get stronger. The vested interests that were developed for decades. They used their fixed resources only for themselves. Occasionally they chose those fine children who seemed to have potential to become a fine man and placed them under their command. The rest were abandoned. Small chances weren't even given easily. The weak competed against each other to go through a place that was thinner than a needle's eye. A hell's path was created to earn even a crumb that was dropped from the strong. However, this place was different. At least in this place where Mu-young ruled, there were opportunities. What they thought at that moment was the dungeon. The dungeon was a place that flowed with honey. A path where they could become strong fast and easily. Mu-young didn't place any restrictions for them to enter that place. They were able to earn rewards by finishing the dungeon by combining their strength. After coming to this place, they had realized that they could survive if they combined their strength after a long time. For them to not chip each other away and gnaw each other to death. They could build their own house and have their own land. In the great city, even that was impossible without authorization. Although it wasn't safe, there were numerous groups in this place. They were able to receive at least minimum safety. Will you return? The old man talked. Would you return and give up this opportunity? I don't want to. The old man answered alone. It was better to die than return. Rather than return to that filthy cesspool, he was willing to die fighting at this place. I also don't want to. I'm sick and tired of it. I want to stop crying by holding on to a rotten rope. But could we remain at this place? Everyone was skeptical about it. Numerous Dakibis and other species. There were at most a dozen humans. They were behind in number. Although Muyang remained neutral, it was impossible to know when he would change his mind. The old man clenched his fist. That's why we need to win. Baltan, you are our hope. If you win, we would be able to gather much more weak people. If there was a small hope among the weak, we could let them know that they could infinitely get stronger. If Muyang's plan was to really encompass everyone, the old man dreamt of a far future. A dream where those weak who were condemned like himself gathered and developed their strength. It was the last bet he placed his life on. At the same time, everyone's attention focused on Baltan. Baltan, the guardian of the territory. People thought he had changed from before. It wasn't normal for him to suddenly become stronger and become a guardian. But nevertheless, Baltan was the only one who stood by their side. Since the fact that Baltan accepted Muyang's deal and became an undead was solely to protect Irene and them. The old man lowered his head further. See you soon. Swoosh. Baltan took out his sword. His white armor shined more than usual. Plod. He moved towards the battlefield. The finals had come. He needed to win against his last opponent, Arand. Please. Win for us. For recognition. For hope. Everyone spoke of their small wish. As Baltan walked towards the battlefield, his footsteps were immeasurably heavy. A dark horse, Arand. The guardian of the territory, Baltan. Their final round strongly focused everyone's attention. Muyang wasn't an exception. They all have their own goals. They all moved with their own ideas. And you are the one who rules over their goals and ideas. Don't think lightly. Never think lightly of that weight. Ogre was speaking of it. It seemed likely for him to secretly know how Muyang thought of them. Muyang's shoulders became heavier. However, this weight was enough for Muyang to fully endure. Ogre scratched his cheek. I watched them closely. How they grew stronger each day. But honestly, I'm not sure. Even if they had goals, I'm not sure what made them change that rapidly. However, even Ogre didn't know everything. He wasn't a wise man but just an unusual fire tar. Muyang thought he knew a bit about this part. It's the most basic of emotions. Most basic. Desire. Achieving goals and desire were subtly different. Even more hidden desire had spurted. It was the same for Muyang. The 40 years of suppressed desire had spurted and he earned the driving force to continuously get stronger. Ogre made a surprised face. Desire, you say. Will you be able to control that desire? Desire shouldn't be controlled. Then, it's about spurting, colliding, and raging. In other words, you are saying you are going to release it since it's bothersome to control. Heha. Ogre laughed out loud. He felt like he got punched hard. It was so. Muyang currently set his own rules and principles. That he was going to leave them be if they were to run wild as they break from their mold. That he was going to measure which desire was bigger between his and theirs. This also was another unpredicted fight. Show me your desires. A strength that spurted and raged would produce a strong strength in the end. If he was after the Demon King's position, shouldn't he at least endure this with a smile? A Demon King was also a king. Even if he had no experience, he couldn't just postpone it. Even Muyang acknowledged that his thoughts had been too small. He was disregarding the strength of a group. He just belittled the strength of mankind. If there were no heroes, he just needed to create them. He realized that simple logic. Wham! Just in time, the fight for desire between Baltan, the guardian of the territory, and the dark horse Arand had started. A thick sandblast scattered like falling starlight. Baltan and Arand's fight didn't seem like it was going to end easily. They both showed ideal development beyond what Muyang had expected, and he was now seeing the results with his own two eyes. Amazing! Baltan was an undead and Arand was a dark elf. They were both beings that were far from human, but their growth speed was monstrous. He thought only humans had infinite potential due to Solomon. However, this wasn't true. Other species also had the same, perhaps even more, driving force. Clang! Arand's attacks were swift and sharp. Baltan had sturdiness as his weapon. Currently, Baltan seemed to have the upper hand. It was a common belief for it to be difficult for lightness to win against heaviness. However, the expectation was once again knocked down. Whoosh! The greatsword flew up high in the air, and in time was pierced onto the ground like a sealed sword. I won. Arand made a smile. Although his body was cut and bruised, he didn't hide his joy at his victory. He looked at his two hands that pierced through Baltan. A warrior with no weapon couldn't be an opponent against Arand. Arand's victory wasn't expected from anyone. The audience became silent. Not a Dakibi or a human, but a dark elf. It was a result that not one person welcomed, but Arand didn't care. As if he wanted Muyang to quickly keep his promise, Arand straightened up in front of Muyang before he kneeled one knee. Certainly, Baltan was superior. Just that Arand's ability to see his opponent's openings was beyond what I imagined. Baltan, who was weaker than Siohan, had achieved surprising development that surpassed Siohan in no time. Just by this, it was a complete surprise, but a figure who he had no thought of had appeared. In a lord's point of view, this was absolutely not a bad situation. And rather, it might have been better for Arand to win instead of Baltan. Arand was the representative of the slaves of the arena, and they were looked down on quite a bit from both the humans and Dakibis of the entire territory. Through this event, somewhat of a balance would be made. To the winner Arand, I will give him the position of Banneret Knight. He can perform duties of a commander and has the authority to lead up to 50 people. While I'm away, he will perform as Lord Deputy with Baltan. After he finished speaking, he looked at Arand's eyes. As if he didn't have any interest in that sort of position. As if they were burning, Arand's eyes glared. Muyang inwardly thought it was fun. As Ogre said, would he be able to enjoy the festival? Heal Arand. As final entertainment, I will allow you to face me and my sword. Sush. Anguish cried in excitement. Bei Sungmin went up and cured Arand's injuries. Although Bei Sungmin was a lich, he also had the ability to use saint skills. Saints were rare, to where there was only one saint among 10,000 priests. Saints were valuable talents that even in the holy city Mulalin, there were only a few dozen saints. Truly, saints only lived in Mulalin. It was practically impossible to see them besides a specific period when the saints made their rounds. And so, having a saint meant that the group didn't yield against any guild or otherwise and had an advantage. Beam. Light surged all over Arand's body. With an incredible speed of recovery, the wounds were completely healed. Skills or techniques weren't needed. Just showering holy power was enough. Strut. Muyang slowly walked up. Arand got up as he made a dignified smile on his face. No words were needed. He has no plans on losing. Muyang chuckled. Arand had no intention of losing the fight against Muyang. Classical eyes of a warrior. Muyang felt his blood pumping in a long time. Muyang never did anything roughly. Even when he tried to catch a rabbit, Muyang was the type to try his best. Even more, Arand was a warrior. It was discourteous for him to fight by restricting himself. And it was necessary to surely teach him who was at the bottom and the top. Overwhelming. That was needed. Here. A blazing dragon went around and around Muyang's entire body. The audience who saw this were astonished. It wasn't made up of a simple form. Although it was weak, there was truly a dragon fear effect. They could feel the soul of the dragon through their skin. This strength didn't exist before he left the territory. Did even conquer a dragon? Xiehen's eyes widened as much they could. His entire body shivered as he was deeply moved. Only a few months. It was clear that he had dominated a dragon and had its soul in his hand. Ogre was also surprised. Dragons were much higher-ranking species compared to fire tars. It might have been possible if the opponent was a chieftain of the fire tars. He never thought Muyang would even gain that level of strength. It seemed like only yesterday when he cured the pum tree. Ogre inwardly let out a sigh of relief. At this speed, it was certain he would soon surpass the chieftain. If at that time they mistreated Muyang, it was unknown how far the aftermath would have been. Even if he did solve the chronic problem about the pum tree, the stubborn elders were hesitant to give Muyang a reward because he was a dakibi. Even more, they certainly would have had thoughts of removing him by finding some fault in him. Imagining a Muyang who survives, develops his strength and one day points a sword at him, made his fiery spine chill. It would become a matter of the greatest regret. He would have nothing to say if he annihilates everyone because they returned a kindness with ingratitude. However, luckily Ogre did everything he could to reward his efforts. He used all kinds of precious herbs for Muyang to go into metamorphosis. A dragon's strength. It's amazing. Eren let out a strange sound. Gave him chills. All Muyang did was show him his strength, but he didn't feel like he was going to win. If you don't want to disappoint me, you will need to try even harder. Muyang spoke indifferently. If what Eren had shown so far was all he had, he would have been disappointed. Swoosh. Ting. Afterwards, Eren came right in front of him after leaving an afterimage. He moved his daggers freely and approached to pressure Muyang. Plang. Crush. Eren was able to use powers of thunder and lightning. He was truly as fast as lightning. The dragon's strength that allowed him to automatically attack and block wasn't able to keep up with his speed. Even so, Eren's expression was gradually getting impatient. None of my attacks are working. He thought he would at least be a worthy opponent. Although he saw the dragon's strength, he didn't believe he would greatly fall behind. In reality, since he had subdued Siohan and Baltan who were under Muyang, his level of confidence was so high that it could pierce through the sky. However, after fighting him firsthand, he was able to understand Muyang's greatness. Muyang didn't move a step from his original position. On the other hand, Eren felt like he was going to get beaten if he was to reduce his speed even a bit, and so he couldn't help but to restlessly move. This also didn't last long. Muyang raised anguish. Then very slowly stretched out his sword. A slow sword. Compared to Eren's lightning speed, it was too slow. It seemed like a piece of cake to avoid it. However, was it because it was out of the recognition range? At some point, anguish broke Eren's dagger, pierced through his chest and crushed his bones. Pwah. And with the retraction of anguish, blood gushed out from Eren's chest at the same time. Just one strike of a sword. However, it was a method he couldn't understand at all. Ow. It's my best sword. Endlessly think about it and fight fiercely. If there was something you learned, you will become much stronger than now. Muyang turned his body. He didn't use acceleration. He gathered all the enlightenment he learned so far and expressed it in a single strike of a sword. This was Muyang's own way of acknowledgement to the winner, Eren. Asterisk. The moment the festival ended, Muyang implemented actions to strengthen the overall territory. By combining the 1,000 dwarves and all the territory's manpower, they built walls and hard buildings. On top, by using about 1,000 lord points, Muyang made a small temple. Normally, you needed 2,000 lord points to build a temple, but you could add the general effects of a temple with just 1,000 points. There is nothing bad about having a temple for the Devil's Long Night. The temple Muyang built was a place where the god of Dakibis, Azura, was served. Although its size was small, Azura was in existence who was concerned with Muyang and influenced him. If anything, it would be beneficial and not harmful. As expected, as he built the temple, additional effects existed. Azura's small temple has been completed. The temple was truly worth the price. As Azura's vassal changed to Azura's spokesperson, its rank also increased. It seemed enough to prepare for the devils. As the other species quickly developed and gained strength to resist, it created a situation where it would be worth his while to fight most devils. On top of that, there was a chance for Azura's blessing to continuously be added. If that happened, he would need to increase the number of temples, but this also would be solved at the same time as the devil's long night begins. Lord has built a temple for whom? Ahum. Aya. The moment the temple was built, the Dakyabes cheered. They sang and danced as they trembled. They were able to serve both and Hum at one place. Also, there was another extra effect. I have heard the sound of Hum's voice. Please accept us, the Earth Dakyabes. Are you the Hum told us to follow you. After the temple was built, Dakyabes from all around swarmed in. The numbers weren't that many, but it seemed like the effects of the temple spread quite far. Most came by saying that they had come to this place by hearing the voice of Hum. Like the time when they gathered for the ceremony, it seemed like there was some sort of a special signal. Could being on a roll be more of a fitting phrase than now? Thanks to this, they could accelerate the development of the territory. All other species quickly developed and became stronger day by day. And as more time passed, additional information popped up. The Devil's Long Night. A period when the moon turned red and souls cried. During this time, the devils were especially vulnerable. No one knew as to why. It occurred approximately once every 5 years and lasted for 3 months, during which numerous devils roamed about. Apart from those with a rank of Demon King and above, all devils did this. The devils aren't perfect. It was the conclusion humanity formed after fighting with the devils for decades. The reason why devils weren't very active outside of the demon god's territory was also thought to be connected to this Devil's Long Night. It was because no matter how much they went berserk, they didn't tend to leave this territory. Of course, there were times when a devil with the rank of Duke or higher would occasionally break free of the territory, leading a large army to attack humans, but generally that was a rarity. Even though it was only once every 5 years, the fact that they had periods like this was a sign that the devil itself was an incomplete creature. However, it was also humans who couldn't do anything about those incomplete beings. I can't say that the monsters are also unaffected. Muyang looked up at the sky. A red moon. The full moon lit up the ground. While looking up at the moon, even Muyang had a strange feeling. The monsters would definitely face changes, however, different monsters would have different changes. Nevertheless, if it was here, thanks to the psychological effect of Azura's small temple, they were able to maintain some calmness. I did everything I could. He built up a wall. It was designed not to shake against all but the strongest magic. He created siege weapons and directed training. The population, which had begun with 20,000 people, had increased to 30,000. This was also due to Azura's temple being built, which caused Dakyabes from many places to flood in. And so Muyang did everything he could. He didn't know how long they could hold out against the devil's attack, but it was definitely not going to collapse easily. Erend, I'll give you my first order. At the top of the castle, the Lord's room. At the softly spoken words, there was a response from the other side of the door. What is it? Erend straightened up. Erend, who had become a bannered knight, still wanted to defeat Muyang, but since their duel he loyally followed Muyang more than ever. It seemed the effect of seeing this slow sword once worked properly. Gather those with agile bodies and start doing reconnaissance of the surroundings. I will follow your command. Also, it was an important duty. There was no way Erend couldn't have known about it. However, he continued to speak as if there was something else he wanted more. When this task has been completed, could you show me that sword again? Myung gave a small smile. Errand. He was truly an interesting fellow, wasn't he? Even though he was on the other side of the door, he could naturally feel his fighting spirit. It felt like he wasn't following him because he was the Lord, but because he wanted to win against him. If there is only one, it should be okay. Aaron was quickly getting stronger at a pace that even Myung found surprising. Even more so, he was an aspirant who always dreamed of fighting with Myung whenever he had a chance. There seemed to be no harm in having someone like this next to him, as it could help him stay alert at all times. His ambition could be the greatest enemy of complacency. It's not a sword you can see with just those skills. Of course it would be like that. Then I will ask you after I gain more merits. It wasn't like Aaron had no sense of shame. Instead, he was going to build up more merits so Myung would not be able to refuse. Myung acquiesced to his obvious intentions. Finally, Aaron began to move from the door. I don't know what kind of devils will appear. I can't move from this place. This is the biggest problem. In enduring the devil's long night, Myung found the most important thing was reconnaissance. If he could understand them ahead of time, it was possible to establish countermeasures. The possibility of stopping it that way was higher than through helplessness. However, Myung himself was at a level where he could win against most devils. But on the contrary, they would need to know that they could be hunted by me. He had no intention of becoming prey. Myung was a hunter, more skilled than anyone. He adjusted anguish at his waist and looked up at the red moon. Fighting spirit surged through him and he was filled with the desire to fight right away. Was it because he was, or was there another reason? His heart wouldn't settle down easily. Ta-tap. Ta-tap. A large man reminiscent of a death god sat on a throne made of unicorn horns, drumming his fingers against his seat while immersed in thought. The rare, mysterious figure surrounded by black cloaks and numerous bones was none other than Horus, the 64th seat demon god. Horus held the power to lead 21 demon kings, and to burn everything he considered an enemy. The timing is bad. Ta-tap. Ta-tap. The sound of his fingers tapping against the throne reverberated throughout the wide, gruesome interior of the castle. However, before him, tens of thousands of devils were bowing before him. Before the appearance of the red moon, I should have purged the opposition. I miscalculated. At that moment, one of the demon kings carefully raised his head and said, Lord Horus, if you give the order now, we will go into battle again. Horus stroked his jaw as he replied. How many feudal lords were affected? Exactly 76 feudal lords were affected by the moon and ran out. Feudal lord. That is to say, the aristocracy. He said the number was 76. It was more than he thought. If he thought of the subordinates beneath them, it was tens of thousands. Withdraw those guys' territory. Any fellow that is shaken from the red moon doesn't deserve to be under my command. However, Lord Horus. Among them, Duke Bastro is included. Bastro is. Horus frowned. If it was Duke Bastro, he was one of the most influential of the feudal lords who had married one of Horus's daughters, a king's son-in-law. Horus thought he had suffered great injuries during the fight between the demon gods' factions and was recuperating, but Horus didn't think he would be influenced by the moon and run away. Horus, who had been concerned briefly, spoke again. Withdraw. Things will have to be stricter. The regulations had to be strict. If they made exceptions, things would start to fall apart piece by piece. Things were like that, especially at a time like this. The demon gods were divided between those in favor and those opposed, and the two sides fought violently. The events that led to the great calamity became a controversy. Although the party in favor was much greater in number, each and every one of the demon gods were overwhelming beings. The usual formula of 1 is equal to 1 did not work at all. Horus himself had strength enough to defeat each demon god beneath his seat, but this imbalance of power held true for those above him as well, and the combined might of the lesser demon gods wasn't something to disregard. And so, if he moved hastily, there was the possibility of being hit with a counterattack. That's why even if he was a king's son-in-law, There was a need to establish discipline by using stricter standards. Gremory. Most likely her operatives are still around. I weeded them out to such an extent, but... Horace's eyes quickly sunk. He had no plans of showing weakness at a time like this. In any case, time was on their side. Since all that their opposition could do was block and run away. Crush. Horace rose from his seat. Wang. Depending on his movements, intense winds blew in every direction. During the time the Red Moon, organizing their internal structure would be a priority. That seemed to be the best course of action. Execute it immediately. At the same time as Horace spoke, the devils became excited. We will follow the order of the great Horus. We will follow the order of the great Horus. The great. A uniformed voice that struck from every direction spread. Devils were not only inside the castle but outside as well. They numbered well in the scores of hundreds of thousands. Before long, hundreds of thousands of devils began to move in unison. Devils. Among them, the nobles and their territories were in a very close relationship. In the case of the noble devils, they claimed an area as their own territory and influenced it, but if the Red Moon made the nobles crazy, the devils they ruled were bound to be agitated. Bastro was like that. Bastro and the 50,000 devils under him were like that. Today I want to see blood. Bastro took 50,000 devils and slowly marched south. In addition, together with the feudal lords that followed him, they were accompanied with an army of devils that was well over 100,000. Although they ate up all the monsters that they caught while they marched, their thirst was not sated. We need a stronger enemy. These kind of small fries won't work. For quite some time during the southward march, there was a monster that caught Bastro's eyes. A giant of fire. Fire tar. It was able to be called a top predator, and most importantly, they lived in groups. It was a very large area, but the owner of this area seemed to be a fire tar. Bastro's eyes glittered. Muyang, who had heard Aran's report, frowned. 100,000 devils. The scale itself was different. If a noble could move at that scale, he would have to be at least a count or higher. From the start, a boss-level monster had appeared. And at the moment Muyang found out about the devil, a screen popped up. Duke Bastro and 100,000 devil soldiers have appeared. The Duke Bastro, Count Archeope, Baron Alaman, Baron Arthur, Baron Aluna. High-rank devils 43. Mid-rank devils 620. Low-rank devils 96,300. It was about the size of the enemy. Most of them were low-level devils, but there were well over 7 noble-level devils. If it was a duke, it was the rank directly below Demon King. It was a strong person that one couldn't and shouldn't see easily. Fortunately, they didn't invade to seek out Muyang's territory. He's waging war with the Fire Tars. Duke Bastro's objective was the Fire Tars. Since Muyang's territory itself was a bit on the outskirts, there was a chance for him to overcome this crisis without being noticed. But that didn't mean he was going to let it pass. By helping the Fire Tars, he would be able to thin the number of devils that approached his territory. Lord, the devils have invaded. It was when Muyang was calculating various moves. Baltan, the territory guardian, had hurriedly come in and spoken. Baron Alaman. He led approximately 2,000 devil soldiers and attacked Muyang's castle wall. Kaha. I'm in luck. I thought for sure I'd only end up scouting, but while I was getting bored, this turned out well. Plang. Plang. The devil soldiers hurled huge rocks and used siege weapons to push the gates. After one huge shock after another, it seemed the gates would soon give way. However, no matter how much it was assaulted, it only shook and the walls were not destroyed. Soon Alaman, who had been triumphant in the beginning, also lifted his head. The gate and wall were both so firm. So it's designed with magic. It's been made by dwarves. No wonder. What are the wizards doing? Quickly attack. Alaman, who identified the problem, shouted. Then the 100 devils behind Alaman executed the orders. Soon, countless magical attacks descended and struck the walls. This time it worked. The wall gave a huge shudder and a part of the upper section was swept away. It's fairly strong, but I, Alaman, cannot be stopped by it. Dear, I'll kill you all. He couldn't resist his excitement from just imagining the slaughter that would begin in a moment. The moment when Alaman's emotions were heightened. Yike. Thump. Something fell from the sky. The large monster Cerberus and the evil spirit predator Taken. Of course, Bei Sungmin and Muyang were also present. For people blocked behind them. Soon the door opened and tens of thousands of soldiers appeared. In the lead were Baltan and Arand. So it seems like I can't avoid this. Fung. Muyang smiled bitterly and took out Anguish. I won't spare even one. As if he never smiled to begin with, he erased his expression. If during this there was a survivor, things would be complicated. He had to wipe them out in one go. Muyang himself soon became a slaughterer. In any case, it seemed inevitable that he would bump into the devils. It couldn't be helped. If he couldn't avoid them, he had no choice but to kill them. A red light shined on Muyang's surroundings. As the Absolute's territory was proclaimed, it started to influence even the devil. However, the first to approach wasn't Muyang. Sword 2 and Sword 3 suddenly popped out from Muyang's back. Kaihaha. Fine. Let's have a fight. Baron Alaman laughed out loud. He was currently drenched in the magical power of the red moon. He wanted to see blood, and he would only be satisfied after seeing it. On top, he also had a boundless fighting spirit that couldn't be explained unless he was mad. The reason why humanity called devils a fighting species, the fragmentary example was in front of him. Not only Baron Alaman but the 2,000 devils in the surrounding were shuddering their bodies as they thought of the fight that would soon occur. The devils at this time are more like undead than undead. They fought until their last breath. They didn't even bat an eye even if a part of their body was cut off. Devils were a type of creature that forgot about pain when they were excited. It was the reason why humanity avoided the devil's long night, even after the fight with the devils intensified. Even if the number was only 2,000, they couldn't be disregarded. It is a holy battle that participates in. Hunt down every last one of the enemy. Aum. Ahum. Aum. Ahum. Sush. Seo Han smashed a devil soldier using his huge club. With that as a start, a fierce fight began. However, about 4 or 5 people were needed to face against one devil soldier. If there was something that was fortunate, it was that the quality of equipment the different species including the Dakibis were all wearing was greatly enhanced, incomparable to what they had before. It was the result of all the dwarves hammering day and night. Kaiha. This is the smell. The smell of blood spilled in battle is making me crazy. The thorns on Baron Alaman's entire body rose. The thorns stretched freely and pierced through those who he identified as enemy. Alaman took the blood that ran down the thorns himself and drank it. And as he drank more and more blood, Alaman's wings throbbed like a heart. His body was slowly getting bigger. Even more, it seemed like a few thorns were released. Sword 2 and Sword 3, aim for the knights. I'll take care of Alaman. After watching the thorns, Muyang gave them an order. Even among the devil soldiers, there were 2 devils dressed as knights who were protecting Baron Alaman. As long as the 2 were present, it was hard for Muyang to face Alaman alone. But if it was Sword 2 and Sword 3, they should easily be able to fight against high-rank devils. The fact that they have a noble position itself means they are top-rank devils. It meant that they also had small authority. Baron Alaman's authority was precisely those thorns. Numerous thorns acted as a spear and a shield at once as they protected his body and pierced his opponents. Even more, as his body enlarged as he drank more blood. If Muyang didn't stop him quickly, unpredictable levels of damage would occur. A noble's true strength is because of their authority. If he could see through the authority and destroy it, he could be no more than a high-rank devil. A noble, a demon king was like that. A view that perhaps it would be the same for the demon gods was predominate. A devil's strength wasn't simply due to the rank difference but due to their authority. That means that if he could nullify their authority, he could definitely handle them. Taken, clear the way. Trust me. I have faced devils tons of times. The evil predator Taken was normally a being living in the Azura path. It wasn't odd at all for a devil to be there in the form of an evil spirit. Swoosh. Afterwards, Taken moved quickly with his sword in hand and slew devils. His swordsmanship and movement were very familiar. In that short period of time he made those his own. Sword 2 and Sword 3's specialty. He was able to replicate some degree of their swordsmanship in the way they ran. You could say that it was stealing, but because Muyang knew how crazy it was to learn simply by watching, even Muyang couldn't help but to accept it. Following the path Taken made, Muyang ran straight. And using the fly ability of the Belt of Aries, he reduced the distance instantly. Like anguish touched the skin of Baron Alaman. However, all it did was scratch it slightly. It was because the thorns interlaced his entire body like a form of armor. It tickles. Alaman laughed. Afterwards, Alaman smirked. A prey approached to get himself killed. I don't know why, but you're getting on my nerves even amongst all the ones here, but it's good that you've come. The one who was on Baron Alaman's nerves was Muyang. From the moment Muyang appeared, Muyang was strangely on his nerves. Instinctively, it was similar to a repulsion. Alaman was planning to clear his surroundings and approach Muyang himself, but he just fell into his lap. How could he not laugh at this situation? It's hard to read his grains. However, besides Alaman's intentions, Muyang endlessly was trying to figure out Alaman. Everything has grains. If he could just find the grains, he could destroy even the toughest things in the world. But because tens of hundreds of thorns were interlaced, it was quite difficult to read the grains on him. It would be endless for him to remove them one by one. There should be just one grain that could pierce through that entire armor. Prank. In an instant, thorns surged out and dispersed from Alaman's body. He barely blocked them, but as the thorns bent, it destroyed Muyang's entire scope of movement. Blaze. At the same time, he activated Dragon's Soul. Muyang's whole body was blazing with fire and instantly burned the thorns. After seeing this, Alaman let out an exclamation as if it was amusing. A dragon fire? Amazing. But it's nothing compared to Horus's flames. Horus, the 64th seat demon god. It was unexpected to hear his name at a place like this. They are Horus's devils. One of the most dangerous demon gods. There were images that passed through Muyang's head. That guy. Only hell was left in a place where Horus passed by. Horus's fire burned every enemy. However, if Horus wanted, he could stop an enemy from dying while they burned from the fire. They could truly be burned forever and feel pain. And he was also one of the demon gods who acted to break the walls of the Blue Temple and kill Merlin. After the breakthrough, the great city was swept by hellfire and burned away some few thousand lives. I'm steadily moving forward. Muyang's lips made a slight curve. Muyang was truly moving forward for him to hear Horus's name out loud. He felt certain that the power of 72 demon gods was close to his reach. Baron Alaman was just the stepping stone. Push. Like. Numerous attacks repeated. Alaman's thorn armor didn't break. Are you only able to make ticklish attacks? Kaya haha. He laughed in Muyang's face. The number of wounds on Muyang's body was increasing. A dragon's fire couldn't burn infinitely. However, Muyang's eyes were continuously scanning Alaman's whole body. Just one grain. He just needed to find just one grain that could pierce through those thorns. Nothing else was important. I see it. Muyang's eyes sparkled. Muyang clearly found a strange grain at the moment when the thorns were released and extended. It was more close to a dot than a grain. A dot that joined all thorns. That was his weakness. It was the only flaw to Alaman's authority. At the same time, two horns appeared and Muyang's time slowed. Although it only lasted for a minute in real time for Muyang, it felt closer to 4 minutes. In a world where it was slowed down by 4 times, Alaman's attack seemed very slow. And by focusing on only that one dot, Muyang ran. Push. Anguish accurately pierced through the dot. A strong repelling power was resisted, but he didn't care. You bastard. As if Alaman also felt something strange, he withdrew all the thorns he released. Soon, every thorn approached Muyang, aiming to kill him. Acceleration. An ability included in Hermes' boots. The world felt much slower. Although it was only for 3 seconds, Muyang's world played 5 times slower. All the muscles in his arms screamed out loud. His veins bulged as if they were going to pop out of his skin. Pooh. Soon the dot was pierced. How am I, armor? Alaman spoke as if he couldn't believe his eyes. However, Alaman's whole body turned into ash before crumbling. How am I, armor? Alaman spoke as if he couldn't believe his eyes. However, Alaman's whole body turned into ash before crumbling. I didn't have a proper defense skill, so this is good. There were definitely things which he couldn't take care of with just equipment. On top, after Muyang reached his second metamorphosis, most of his skills were fixed to be above B rank. He was talking about all other skills besides the ones given by the Masters of the Darkness. You could definitely call that a blessing. Just by learning them, they all became B rank skills unconditionally. Even in the past, not many had this. Unless they had crazily high intelligence like Queen of Frostwind Kim Hannah. Intelligence is related to skill proficiency. Just because it was high didn't mean someone got smarter. Instead, it became easier for someone to use their skills, and it helped in raising their proficiency. You could say that it allowed people to read the skill's structure itself. Occasionally, it allowed people to entirely remove the repelling power that skills had. Fortunately, Muyang's intelligence wasn't on the low side. However, you couldn't say that it was on the high side either. A value that wasn't even 300. It was hard to say if he had the intelligence to maintain a skill higher than AB rank. Through this opportunity, I might be able to learn a bunch of skills. Muyang thought of it optimistically. By killing devils with noble status, he could earn crystallization. By gaining all of their skills like this, he could be able to complement parts that he felt slightly lacking. At least there was nothing to lose by learning them. Of course, by learning the skills once, you couldn't get rid of them easily. There was also a possibility for it to become a matter of eternal regret if he was to learn a wrong skill. However, something like regret couldn't be possible for Muyang. The numerous experience and information he piled up for 40 years. It was because those times weren't just wasted. The present, after returning from the future, there was no one else who spent as much time as Muyang in this place, the underworld. Achievement Effect - Devil Hunter, B++. The chance to earn a crystallization after hunting a devil increases. Muyang nodded his head. When someone hunts, there should rightly be something left. It was an effect worthy for a hunter. Are you going to join forces with the Fire Tars? Bei Sungmin asked. Although he died and became a lich, he also had some of his intelligence left. Every now and then he made suggestions like this. However, Muyang shook his head. Joining them comes later. Even if he tried to join forces with the Fire Tars, it was doubtful whether they would accept Muyang. No, it was more likely for them to not accept it. He couldn't think all Fire Tars were like Ogre. However, to fight against Duke Bastro and his close to 10,000 devil soldiers, the Fire Tars' help was essential. So, even if they didn't want to, it was best to make them cooperate. We will cut the enemy's supply route. Devils also needed to eat to survive. Although he said supply route, it was just them hunting monsters and drinking water from a lake. What would happen if those disappeared? Furthermore, the devils were currently excited as they were influenced by the red moon. Even if this is to the extreme, it should be that much of an effective solution. This was one of the tactics he created to manage Devil's long night. Since cutting the supply route in a battle was the basic among basics, there were some parts that were in common. On top, Fire Tars could live for a long period of time without eating. Even the Dakibis and other species could live off the food supplies they stored for a few months. The one who is more in a hurry loses the battle. Since there was no better or easier place to assassinate someone than during a battle, It should be very rare to find someone with more battle experience than Muyang. And after watching numerous battles, he made one conclusion. The more of a hurry you are in, the more mistakes you will make. A small error would greatly help to produce an irrevocable result. So, Muyang was planning to steadily suffocate his enemy. Muyang's gaze deeply sunk. The fire tars gathered in a place near a pum tree. The fire tars were a type of species that were unable to live without a pum tree that gives them a sense of stability. It was an obvious reason. If not, they would be eaten up by the flames they produced themselves. And Bastro and Devil soldiers were threatening the pum tree. Even the fire tars that were hostile towards each other joined forces for this occasion. Vice Chieftain Ogre, has the Great Chieftain not made a decision yet? And so, those fire tars that gathered were a surprising number of 800. The 5 fire tribes gathered. Compared to the devils, the numbers were quite small, but their strength could definitely not be ignored. As they were all one by one a top predator. And as a chieftain who ruled over one of the 5 tribes asked Ogre, Ogre silently just shook his head. For our victory, the chieftain is still thinking. Don't we just need to crush the devils? That's how the sharp-edged feather tribe was annihilated. Did you forget already? A fire tar's enemy is only a fire tar. They were in sharp disagreement. The fire tars were strong. Even humans and devils tried to avoid the fire tars. However, they didn't just avoid them because they were afraid. It was because nothing could be earned from meddling with the fire tars. Basically, the fire tars only lived near a pum tree, and the pum trees were normally apparent near the outskirts where the devil's influences were low. There was no reason for others to meddle with them if they could save so much more time by going around a bit. Of course, you couldn't say they weren't scared at all of the fire tars' counterattack. There is no answer like this. Ogre inwardly let out a deep sigh. Even when he looked at it, the fire tars were too arrogant. Without wanting to advance, they were just stagnant. A fire tar's only enemy is a fire tar? They could only be helpless at invasions because they say stuff like this. They couldn't properly face the reality as it was. They didn't know a thing about what was going on in their surroundings. How could they if they kept their eyes and ears shut themselves? It was also the result of them living in one territory for a long time. There weren't real enemies, and so they stagnated. In that sense, Muyang was a better man. It was surprising how fast he was getting stronger each day. He was also fearless in taking up challenges. He seemed somewhat crude, but his mentality itself was extremely great. Because he had that sort of mentality, Ogre was drawn to Muyang. On the other hand, how were the fire tars? The devils are no match for us. We just need to bring 1 warrior for every 100 devil soldiers. Simple. It's obvious that the great chieftain gets easily scared in his old age. In the past, Chieftain truly made everyone shudder by moving numerous territories. They didn't know. The great chieftain gained insight as he aged. He realized that it wasn't everything to just thoughtlessly face a problem. Among the fire tars, only the great chieftain knew how to win most effectively. Thump. Afterwards, everyone turned their eyes to the pum tree. As if he was bonding, the great chieftain who sat near the pum tree and was lost in his thoughts finally moved. A physique that was 1.5 times bigger than other fire tars. He had an X-mark scar on his forehead and hair that were burning furiously. He slowly opened his mouth. We will leave the pum tree. The pum tree. Nonsense. Of course, there was a strong resistance. The pum tree was like the fire tar's mother. For them, it was a sacred place. Even if they were to leave it, it was hard to promise that they would find another pum tree. If we were to get our hands tied to this place, we will lose. However, the great chieftain was firm in his opinion. It was the conclusion he made after considering the enemy's size and number. If they were to fight in a limited area near the pum tree, the fire tars could never win against the devils. Are you scared? Great chieftain. I'm disappointed. For you to desert the pum tree for mere devils. Shut up. Blaze. The blood that dripped from his clenched fist instantly burned in flames and evaporated. Everyone tightly closed their lips. Overwhelming. He had the vigor to rule over everything in his surroundings. They once again remembered the legend of how the great chieftain made everyone shudder by moving numerous territories. You guys don't know the terror of the devils. He slowly rubbed the X-marked scar on his forehead. It was the only scar on the great chieftain's body. Horus, he played with me as if I was a toy. He spoke the demon god's name. He ground his teeth. He also knew of the Bastro who invaded his territory right now. And because of this, he made the critical decision to leave the Pum tree. At the same time, everyone couldn't help but be surprised. The great chieftain was a living legend to them. Their confidence level about their fire tar origin shot through the roof. Secretly, the fire tars thought that they could face against demon kings and demon gods when they worked together. But for that scar to be from a demon god. It was the first time Ogre heard of this as well. If the current devil soldiers were led by Bastro, they are even a match for me. But is there anyone here who can be a match for me? Only silence filled the surroundings. Of course, there were no fire tars who could be a match for the great chieftain. The great chieftain turned his body as everyone became quiet. If we get our hands tied here, it's impossible to even win. However, we aren't running away. We are going to move a bit wider and crush Bastro. The great chieftain showed strong will. Unless a miracle happened, there was no way for them to win right now against them. And he wasn't that thick-headed to rely on a miracle. He waited for the opportunity. The 800 fire tars were overwhelmed by just the great chieftain. In the end, everyone started to move and leave the Pum tree. To move 2 steps forward, they moved back a step. Muyang. Ogre looked in the direction where Muyang and his territory was located. The fire tars left at once. During that time, he didn't know what the devils would do. If Muyang was caught by the devil soldiers, it would be hard for him to fight against them with just the strength he had. However, at this current situation, there was nothing Ogre could do to help. Unless something changed the situation. But no matter how hard he thought about it, a plan to overcome this situation didn't come to him. They burned the forest. They dried up the water and got rid of everything that could become a food source. 5,000 soldiers were divided into 50 units and each acted uniformly. They killed every monster and burned their flesh to ashes or buried them deep in the ground. They were planning to remove everything the devil soldiers could eat up within their active radius. I think the devils have noticed. Aaron spoke. This also was within his predictions. He couldn't avoid the eyes of 10,000 devil soldiers. It seemed like cutting off their food supply was effective, but the devil soldiers are extremely agitated. If we don't quickly evacuate, there won't be anyone left from the 5,000 soldiers. Aaron spoke as if he was in a hurry. Muyang gently closed his eyes. There was an effect. Now the devil soldiers will move to defend themselves. He was divided on if they should fight or not. However, with their fighting power, they weren't a match. Still, if there was anything they were more exceptional than the devils at, it was their delivery of information. The uniformed operation system which Muyang personally made, operated and built. He needed to use it to the max. It was basics to use favorable points to the max to face an unfavorable situation. It's the way for the weak to win against the strong. He wasn't well versed in strategies and tactics, but he had some knowledge. He witnessed numerous battles with his own 2 eyes, and he also saw that many turnarounds. There were even a few heroes who won a fight that was never winnable. Muyang thought of their moves. Fighting them is the worst move. It was no different than suicide. However, it wasn't like there was no way for the weak to fight against a strong opponent. First, with the finish system, he was going to delay as much as he could and start a speed match. Fighting at a place he wanted and putting his enemy off their guard. The main gist was making them feel as if they could win but not letting them. An opportunity would definitely come if he made them as impatient as he could. Muyang opened his eyes. Don't retreat and set up a stronghold. I will lure the enemy. There were 5 nobles under Duke Bastro's command. Baron Alaman, Baron Arthur, Baroness Aluna, Baron Swing and Count Argon. Why isn't Alaman returning? As Alaman, who went to reconnaissance, didn't return even after a lot of time had passed, Bastro raised a question. But no one could answer him. It was because no one had seen Alaman. Was he killed? Bastro felt strange. Only the fire tars could be their match in this territory. However, didn't the fire tars leave even the pum tree and run away? There would have been no time for them to get rid of Alaman. And in reality, the place they were currently occupying was very close to the pum tree. Blase. The pum tree was burning. The tree that was vital in maintaining their life and the one that the fire tars respected as their mother. It was a story that had nothing to do with Bastro. They just burned it as it was an eyesore. Arthur, take a look around the location where Alaman went to reconnaissance. If there is anything strange, report to me immediately. I'll leave immediately. Baron Arthur went into battle leading 5,000 soldiers. Bastro's eyes shined as he watched him. I don't know who is disturbing us. The third party Bastro missed. He didn't know how big the size was or how strong they were, but it was true that he was interested. It seemed like they wanted the devils to wither away by burning the forest, burying the lake, and taking away all life around them, but the uniformed movement was out of the ordinary. It meant that the actions were through one system of command. It meant that there was someone who reigned as a king in the Fire Tars territory. How could he not be interested? I hope he isn't a coward like the Fire Tars. Honestly, he couldn't repress his disappointment for leaving the pum tree and running away. However, he hoped that the newly appeared enemy would be different. Niai. Bastro kicked the side of the horse he was riding on. It looked similar to the hell horse but was a horned white horse. The unicorn cried softly. Baron Arthur started to reconnaissance the area that Alaman disappeared around with his 5,000 soldiers. It must be here. Not soon after, he found a castle in the outskirts. And nearby it, the equipment of all kinds of devil soldiers weren't organized and were all over the place. It seemed like this was the place where Alaman was killed. Fool. Arthur clicked his tongue. Alaman was the type of guy who rushed headlong without thinking. As he was influenced by the red moon, it seemed like his actions became more reckless. I will revenge for you still. Arthur was different. However, Arthur was also influenced by the red moon. Under the pretext of revenge, he gave his order. Destroy the castle gate and the castle walls. I will drag out the guys inside. A huge 5 m tall devil soldier was the first to act and ran his body into the gate. Crash. The gate greatly shook. A few devils spread their wings wide. Whoosh dash. Thep. Dozens of arrows flew out from the inside of the castle. The few devils who were in the sky were shot down by the arrows. Stone flew from siege equipment towards the devil camp. However, the numbers were small. It wasn't greatly effective. Afterwards, the devil soldiers with their wings spread wide flew over the wall with their spears ready. Crash. Soon the gate also collapsed. Arthur took out his sword. Soon his authority, Pain's perspiration, was activated. Clang. A chill colder than frost circled his sword. The sword became frozen and even the vapor that touched the sword instantly fell to the ground as ice, an unending drip of cold. Truly, the ability to freeze everything it touched. Arthur and his 5,000 devil soldiers entered the castle without much resistance. There is no enemy? Arthur tilted his head. Even the enemies who shot the arrows disappeared without a trace. Did they run off? However, if he wasn't influenced by the red moon, he would have thought something was strange. It was definitely strange for those enemies who killed Alaman to give away their castle with resisting this much. However, Arthur was excited. They entered the castle without any suspicion, and that produced an irrevocable mistake. Clang. Puish. The explosions occurred from all around. You are trying to bury the whole castle. Arthur's eyes widened. He then realized what he had done. However, the devil soldiers and Arthur couldn't be threatened with just normal explosions. However, the explosions that were currently happening were out of the ordinary. Holy power that was extremely hazardous to devils was also included, and it had the fire power that could even melt the skin of a dragon. If they were a bit careful they wouldn't have suffered, but they were already a step too late. Everyone leave the castle. Arthur turned his head. However, it wasn't easy to once again cross the castle gate. A barricade. Why was the barricade on the opposite side? A barricade that was normally supposed to protect the castle wall was on the opposite side and was inside the castle walls. For it to be free for them to come in, but for it to be impossible for them to leave. From the beginning, their enemy's goal was to lure them into the castle. Arrows and siege weapons flew out. That meant that they were inside. It wasn't hard to destroy that invisible barrier. But in the current situation, it was hard for Arthur, requiring time the explosions weren't giving them. Once again he turned his direction. By looking near the location where the arrows flew out, there must be at least one path that leads out. King. Swoosh. This also betrayed Arthur's expectations. There were crossbows and sieges that automatically shot out. In the end he wandered back and forth before he lost even his last chance. Crush. As if they waited for him, everything exploded in Arthur's surroundings. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Myung watched the scene from afar. Although the castle was buried, he had no signs of regret. Even though it was lacking compared to the original Demon Dragon lethal cannon, it's effective as it was mixed with holy power. They tried to recreate the cannonball of the Demon Dragon lethal cannon, which killed the Dark Dragon in one shot, but the firepower itself was a bit lacking. However, Bae Sungmin's holy power was added and used as an extreme counter to the devils. Thanks to it, Myung was able to annihilate all 5,000 devil soldiers. I can just build a new castle. Myung turned around and spoke to those who looked at the buried castle with sorrow in their eyes. With the help of the dwarves, they could reconstruct the castle in a few months. However, he needed to avoid being defeated. Soon Myung approached the buried castle. As he looked around, a crystallization that shined brightly caught his eyes. Unlike Alaman's crystallization, it was filled with chills. Although he just grabbed it with his hand, it felt like his fingers were going to freeze. Gulp. However, Myung gulped it without delay. Then his whole body shivered. The blessings of the user, Myung, will upgrade the rank of Pain's Perspiration skill to be. Name: Pain's Perspiration. Effect: an extreme chill is placed onto a weapon. Asterisk it freezes everything touched by the weapon. Asterisk be careful as it could even freeze you. Creak. Ice covered all around Anguish. As he lightly shook, the moisture in its surroundings froze. After seeing ice powder fluttering like particles, Myung nodded his head. Nice. You might think it was just a freezing skill, but it was on another level compared to the ice-type skills used by wizards. Would it be called an authority for no reason? With just this authority, Arthur gained the title of Baron. Its strength didn't lack compared to top-rank ice-type skills like Blizzard or Ice Dragon's Breath. The crystallizations are appearing more frequently than I expected. 2 crystallizations appeared after killing 2 barons. He was too lucky even considering the effects of the Devil Hunter title. Since approximately with calculations, you needed to kill at least 20 nobles to earn just 1 crystallization. I'll return to the built stronghold. After confirming that all of the devils became ashes, he turned his body. He could only use this move once, not having a spare castle to booby trap. However, it was certainly effective. The wind has changed. If there was no miracle, he was going to create it. Myung thought of numerous ways to overcome the current situation. Alaman and Arthur were dead. When Bastro sent more soldiers after feeling strange, there was only a collapsed castle. They were killed. Indeed, as he lost 2 in a row, it didn't feel all that good. Through this, he was able to confirm that his enemy was formidable, but it was the truth that he looked down on his enemy. If I was to refuse a provoked fight, I, Bastro, cannot be considered a warrior. About 100,000 soldiers were reduced to 90,000 already. You could say it was only 1/10 of his army, but he gave it up too easily. Aluna. Fwing. I'll give you guys 20,000 soldiers each. Find them and kill them cruelly. Even if 2,000 or 5,000 didn't work, it would be hard with 10,000. However, with 40,000 devil soldiers, they could destroy even the huge castle of humans. He didn't believe the current apparent enemy could also face 40,000 devil soldiers as well. Looking at the appearance of the monsters that were part of the fight, they were very lousy. Dakibis, dwarves and elves, they are all insignificant creatures. The ones who have a limit from birth. Unless they were extremely rare species like the high elves or rune dwarves, they couldn't have dared to fight with the devils. If they were to lose now, it would also be a humiliation. He couldn't suffer that sort of humiliation. I will present you the enemy's head. For Bastro's glory. Then the rest of the two barons left with 40,000 soldiers. Baroness Aluna and Baron Swing also didn't think they would ever lose. Muyang chose Gorilla. With speed battle as his lead, he killed off his enemies little by little. He used the advantage of the topography, made detours, and encamped as he followed the ways for the weak to win against the strong like a textbook. Here Bei Sungmin made a big impact. As an Arch-Lich, he was able to use magic and holy powers at the same time, and even if it was a lich, it was still extremely dangerous to a devil, therefore there were lots of use for him. This rat-like bastard. Those were her last words. Swoosh. Baroness Aluna's body was frozen solid. It was because Muyang's sword penetrated Aluna's center. 3 in a row. As he killed nobles, he continuously earned crystallizations. Of course, it wasn't bad to earn them. The crystallization was the devil's strength itself. As he ate more and more, he got stronger. Clang. Clang. As Aluna was killed, the offshore devil soldiers made a frantic last-ditch effort. Muyang also used all his military strength. The progress of the battle was a tie. The situation couldn't be helped. As one low-level devil soldier was a match to 3 Dakibis. They were fighting well thanks to them draining the devil soldiers' strength in advance. Even if they were to win, they wouldn't be able to avoid a great loss. Thump. Thump. It was at that moment. From afar, giants of fire approached them. Muyang. It was Ogre and about 100 fire tars. As Ogre was glad to see him, he called Muyang's name as he threw devil soldiers aside. No matter if they were devil soldiers, unless they were nobles, they couldn't easily be an opponent to Ogre. But he wasn't the only one. A big fire tar, the great chieftain, stood out among them. Even the excited devil soldiers couldn't approach him easily. It felt like there was an invisible wall that was activated around him. They finally came. After looking at them, a small arc was drawn with Muyang's lips. The great chieftain, Ogre, and 100 other fire tars. It was a smaller number than he had expected, but it was enough to overcome this current situation. Haha, you are truly one heck of a guy. I never expected you to make it this far. Ogre continued to swing his huge spear with a smiling face. It was a smile that didn't fit at all on a battlefield where blood and pieces of flesh were splashed across the ground, but it was proof that he was so happy that he couldn't contain it. Since even what he was unsure about had become reality. A few hundred fire tars abandoned and left the pum tree. Planned to fall back. Although he comforted himself that he took a step back to move 2 steps forward, in the end, it was no different than fleeing to avoid the devils. He looked for an opening and an opportunity to attack, but no one knew how long they would need to retreat. But the tables have turned. Muyang had turned the tables. Those devils that were known as nobles were continuously hunted. It was a move no one had expected. No one had anticipated for Muyang. It was an obvious thing if they thought about the first time Muyang had appeared. Even though he did solve the problem regarding the pum tree, Muyang's strength itself was lacking a lot compared to the fire tars. But now, swoosh. Baroness Aluna fluttered as she became ashes. He killed off devils with noble titles all on his own. Not just that. Has killed the leader of the enemy. Push more. He also made it possible for the few 10,000 soldiers to follow him. This all happened in just 1 year. Even the great chieftain changed his mind because of this. Although I haven't seen him yield before. If Muyang didn't send the Arch-Lich, Bei Sungmin, they wouldn't have known about the fact that they were struggling. However, not everyone easily believed him, and in the end, only the great chieftain, vice chieftain Ogre, and their tribe members arrived at this place. But if he was to obtain the desired results, he believed it could change everyone's mind. It wasn't like they could just leave the devils who burned the Pum tree be. Even the great chieftain would have allowed them to help Muyang after seeing how they had a chance. In reality, the great chieftain's eyes constantly looked at Muyang. He is an amazing person. Please look at his face until you're satisfied. Because Ogre felt that the person he acknowledged was also being acknowledged by the great chieftain, a strange palpitation occurred in his heart. Someone who wasn't acknowledged by anyone was acknowledged by the great chieftain. And Muyang was worthy to be acknowledged. Someone who might even surpass the great chieftain before long. Maybe someone who could change this world like he did right now. That sort of person. You're late. It was what Muyang said as Ogre made his way through numerous devil soldiers and reached the place Muyang was at. Ogre smirked. You're cold as always. Let's talk after we end this fight. Muyang's face showed how tired he was. Although they said it was a guerrilla operation, they fought for a total of 14 days endlessly. They were days when he couldn't sleep properly as he needed to look over every situation and give orders as a lord and a commander. If it wasn't for his superhuman mentality, he would have already passed out. This sort of rigorous schedule was possible because the person at the center of all this was Muyang. Ogre inwardly clicked his tongue, but he still understood. It was better than being sent away. It wasn't as easy by looking at the current situation. Okay, I'll run wild. Slash. Ogre's spear slit the ground. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harmony's crystallization. It was the item he earned by killing Baroness Aluna. After the fight ended, Muyang quickly swallowed it. Harmony's crystallization has been ingested. Combination skill. Muyang nodded his head. If he used a skill related to combination well, it could produce a much greater effect than it states. Of course, if not used properly, it could also produce no real results, but as he didn't have any skills related to this, it was that much closer to being an advantage to him. Aren't you afraid of turning into a devil? The great chieftain who was watching him from a close range spoke. The great chieftain. It was also the first time Muyang had seen him this close. However, unlike before, there was no shiver. Before, when he watched the great chieftain from afar, he instinctively shivered because he felt the difference in their level. However, now there was only a small distance between them. He didn't feel a difference between their level. It meant that he caught up. Even if you take a devil's strength, you don't become one. Muyang answered calmly. In the past, it was a rumor that went around before Muyang returned in time. That you might become a devil yourself if you continuously ingest the crystallization you earned by killing devils with a noble title. There was a story of such. It wasn't a conclusion. It was something the devil killer, the one who killed the most devils and ingested 50 crystallizations, declared. Of course, 50 crystallizations might not be enough, but it was like a miracle itself to collect 50 crystallization. You will become something more devilish than a devil. In the past, there was that sort of guy. As Muyang glanced quizzically at the great chieftain shook his head. Anyways, I have watched your active part in this battle. Within this much military power, you successfully fought back against the devils. A battle isn't simply a fight of strength. A battle can be fought by 100 or 1,000 men. Besides the times when there is overpowering power, the point is tactics and strategies. How well you manage the colliding strength of numerous troops. Fortunately, Muyang didn't seem like he didn't have any talent. You're right, strength isn't everything. However, there are 5 noble devils that came with Bastro. How many did you fight alone? 2. 2? Amazing. However, even the great chieftain wasn't able to fully grasp the current situation of their battle. If Muyang killed 2 and tens of thousands of soldiers, it was truly possible. You could say just by that he did all his work. However, Muyang shook his head and stretched 2 fingers. 2 are left. Baron swing and Count Argon. I can see why Bastro is in a hurry. Regarding this, even the great chieftain seemed a bit surprised. It couldn't be helped. Muyang's troops that currently surrounded him, the setup itself was shabby, totally beyond description. With these troops, how could he kill 3 noble devils? It wasn't an easy task for anyone. Is this all of the fire tars? I thought at least 500 would gather. Muyang spoke as he knitted his brows. An extremely rude manner in front of the great chieftain. In reality, other fire tars tried to backlash, but the great chieftain stopped them as he stretched out his hand. Since we figured out the noble devils were continuously killed, everyone would gather. Then it would be fine to continue the battle. Mine and your soldiers need to rest. If not now, it would be many times harder to kill Baron Swing. This is the right time. Muyang urged with perseverance. Baroness Aluna and Baron Swing had left for battle with 20,000 soldiers each. Although he had killed Baroness Aluna, guerrilla warfare was also applied to Swing as well. If not now, when the devil soldiers were weak, it was possible for all the devils to gather. The fight would become several times harder. Muyang's eyes faced the great chieftain. A look without an inch of hesitation. It might have seemed defiant, but you couldn't say this wasn't the eyes of a warrior either. Rather, this look actually pleased the great chieftain. Good. Our tribe will help. Thanks. Muyang expressed his gratitude shortly before he quickly started to move. 100 fire tars, including the great chieftain and ogre. It wasn't impossible to kill 20,000 devil soldiers that lost their strength. Count Argon spoke to Bastro. Bastro, Lady Aluna and Lord Swing aren't returning. Among 40,000 soldiers, not one came to bring any news. Even if they were in a hurry to reconnoiter, they should have chosen an informant and sent word. If not, it was normal for them to use magic to communicate. But there was nothing. There was only one reason for this sort of case. Annihilation. They said the fire tars have reappeared. Maybe it has something to do with them. Grit. Bastro ground his teeth. In total, about half of his troops disappeared without properly fighting. He couldn't just watch any longer. Bastro kicked the side of the unicorn. I need to see it with my own eyes who the hell he is. Afterwards, with a big frown on his face, Bastro spoke. All troops head to war. Muyang was also reading the movements of the devils that left the pum tree. Muyang, what are you going to do? Ogre asked. By even getting rid of Swing, Muyang had become a commander who could be trusted on. Muyang turned his head and looked around. In total, well over 700 fire tars and the 10,000 troops Muyang had were gathered. Normally, it was normal to watch the situation, but he had a chance for total victory. Spirit was something you should never look down on. Just by being absorbed in the happiness of their successes and charging towards their final victory could produce great strength. If they were to hold back for a moment, it was possible to lose that spirit. Do or die. What does that mean? Stake everything on one fight, since the devils will no longer be fooled by our tactics. Bastro would have felt strange. On top, judging by the path of his movement, it was extremely cautious. It might seem as Muyang was at an advantage if he was to battle against time, but that wasn't really true. Burning the forest and removing their food supply was no more than to induce Bastro to be impatient so that he would make mistakes. If they were to go for a protracted war, Muyang and the troops wouldn't survive. So it was Sydney or the bush. Just Muyang had the authority to choose the terrain. Ogre, I need your help. Speak whatever you need. If it is something I can do, I will do it all. Ogre was born in this territory. He should be well aware of the surrounding topography. On the other hand, there should be a limit with Bastro. It was the difference between a native and a foreigner who just arrived. I will definitely win. Although he said Sydney or the bush, Muyang wasn't planning to lose. Bastro and 50,000 devil soldiers approached a location where both sides were cliffs. It was because they found out that the troops of their enemy were gathered somewhere around this place. Needless to say, it probably is a trap. He had a strong feeling that he was being induced. Bastro sent out scouts to look around the place. And he went back to make a detour towards a path that wasn't between cliffs. It was because he had no reason to fight in a terrain where he was at a disadvantage. However, Muyang also knew that Bastro would avoid the location. He turned around. But he was one step behind. Prank. Crush. A rift was created on the ground. Dwarves had dug up the ground and placed explosives in the path where they had to head back. At the same place where the explosion occurred, water gushed. They had disturbed the groundwater. He got me. Bastro frowned deeply. Even though it hadn't affected his life, his movements were restricted as the ground was dug up. As if they were waiting for this moment, fire tars and 10,000 soldiers were approaching from afar. You bastard! Do you think you can stop me with this shallow move? Bastro soared up into the air as he rode the unicorn. Numerous devils also spread their wings. In reality, only a few devil soldiers died. However, Muyang simply made a smile. It seems like they can't see their wings corroding. Sizzle. The widely spread wings slowly burned. The effects were minimal, but it was enough to affect their flight. And Bei Sungmin, the Arc Lich, was continuously repeating spells beside Muyang. Although it isn't holy water, it is water affected by holy powers. It's quite effective against low-level devils. It wasn't easy to add holy power to the groundwater. It was only effective against low-level devils. It was also only effective to the weak part of their skin, the wings. However, considering how most of the devil soldiers were low-level devils, he felt that it would produce a result much greater than he expected. Basta starred. Bastro screamed out loud with his neck veins bulging. Instinctively, he recognized Muyang as the main culprit behind all this. The main culprit whose enormous influence was behind the elimination of the 4 nobles under his command and the massacre of over 50,000 devil soldiers. As if that wasn't enough, Bastro was caught in a trap. Now that he was under the influence of the Red Moon, Bastro's rage was reaching the extreme. Rip. Ryip. The muscles of his body expanded and increased in size. A mist similar to a heat shimmer formed around him. After a while, the fog merged together and reproduced Bastro's figure. A clone. A total of 6 clones were created. Soon after, the completed clones began to move and rampage through the surroundings. However, only their physical features were identical, but their equipment varied. For example, the person presumed to be the main body was riding a unicorn, while the remaining 6 weren't mounted. Their weapons and armor were different. So that's his authority. Each of the clones had as much power as the main body. Muyang's soldiers could not even resist. That literally meant they had to deal with the 7 Bastros. If these were regular clones, one might think he would just need to kill the main body mounted on the unicorn, but all 7 are both a clone and the real Bastro. Muyang read the grains of all 7 of them, and the grains were all the same. If the main body was to die, one of the remaining clones would become the main body again. Its authority was as such. Indeed, the authority of someone who'd become more or less a duke wasn't ordinary. I'll handle Bastro. You and Ogre deal with the rest. The great chieftain of the Fire Tars butted in. He was someone revered by 700 Fire Tars. If you thought about the Fire Tars ecology, that was a tremendous thing. He was capable of sufficiently dealing with Bastro. Also, if the great chieftain handled Bastro, after that there was only one person that could be considered an obstacle. Count Argong. Considering that all 4 nobles eliminated by Muyang were barons, if it was a count, his existence was a much greater obstacle. He didn't carry a weapon. Instead, he was carrying a single bead. Every time he stroked the bead, black gusts of wind projected outwards. The devil soldiers also leaped from the remnants of the groundwater that burst forth. It wasn't an entirely good situation. Muyang, do you know why the Fire Tars are called unrivaled predators? Ogre spoke with a calm expression. Isn't it because they're inherently strong? That is also true, however. We have acquired the habit of fighting. Even if we aren't given orders, we know what needs to be done on our own. Muyang looked around their surroundings. Pong. Bastro and the great chieftain were in a fierce battle. Suddenly, he moved closer and reached out his fist, and through the force of wind alone, it was enough to shake the ground. The other fire tars cleared the area for the great chieftain's battle. They were tying up the feet of the high-ranking devil soldiers and strongly fighting back. Although we also had a cutthroat competition regarding the Pum tree, we were able to peacefully progress our work thanks to you, Muyang, as you solved the chronic problem. It's like a butterfly effect. What if Muyang hadn't been able to solve the chronic problem of the Pum tree? The fire tars would not have been able to easily unite. They competed for the Pum trees because Pum trees had short lifespans, and once the problem was solved they were able to fully share them with each other. However, just when they were about to live harmoniously, Duke Bastro burned down the Pum tree. It was this occasion that led to 700 fire tar comrades that had aligning interests with Muyang. Ogre Taken, open the way. I will put that typhoon to sleep. Is there a way? The area of the typhoon was spread wide with Count Argong at its center. The blades of wind that did not discriminate between foe or ally. Muyang nodded his head. It seems we can offset it. It would have been impossible before, but there were some skills that were obtained from ingesting the crystallization of the devils. Although complete destruction was impossible, if utilized properly it might be possible to offset the typhoon adequately. So far I've earned 4 skills. He'd killed 4 barons and earned 4 skills. Thorn Formation, Pain's Perspiration, Total Combination and Underwater Explosion. Among those, Muyang had made a new skill from combining Pain's Perspiration and Underwater Explosion. The skill acquired from combining the two Zero Explosion. Muyang stretched out his hand. At that moment, numerous ice crystals began to form around his palm. As a crystal the size of a fist was made, Muyang tossed it. Kwang! The ice crystal that flew directly towards the typhoon exploded and caused the creation of countless ice formations. Eventually, to his surprise, the typhoon was frozen. However, once was not enough. Muyang ran out and continued to use Zero Explosion. Where did you learn to use that kind of skill? Taken's bones rattled as he asked. For some reason he seemed envious, but Muyang merely shrugged his shoulders. When they exploded the groundwater, the surrounding area became humid from the heated water spread throughout the air. It was natural that the typhoon itself seemed to freeze because it had sucked up all the moisture when it was being created. Chwak. However, the authority of a duke wouldn't merely summon a single typhoon. Several gusts of wind lashed at their surroundings. Dozens of powerful gusts of wind similar to black holes were created, and it felt like you could be sucked in just by being close to them. Fung. Anguish gave a small cry. Ogre and Taken were faithful shields. They were blocking the gusts with their bodies and cut through the wind as they opened the way. It's not difficult. 2 horns sprouted from Muyang's head. Acceleration. The world slowed to quarter speed. However, there wasn't much opportunity for dueling the Count. To even continue the fight, he needed to end it with a single stroke. Pawak. With Ogre and Taken shielding, Muyang flew up. Bei Sungmin. He was an Arc Lich. He had the ability of a saint and a necromancer. Even though he was a lich, his existence was incompatible with the devils. It was possible for Bei Sungmin to inflict a fatal blow just by injecting a devil with holy power and then exploding it. Of course, he was the priority target for the devil soldiers for this reason. However, it wasn't easy for the low-level devils to even approach Bei Sungmin. Oi! The necklace Bei Sungmin wore, the talisman, spewed out light. The talisman was the material that makes up the holy sphere. It was a necessity for the manifestation of a wish and was desired by over 100,000 priests, popes and saints. Just by its existence, it had the ingrained power to repel evil. However, there was a lot of devil soldiers. 3 high-level devil soldiers surrounded Bei Sungmin in no time. You have an incompatible object. Hand it over to us. We'll dye it with evil. What can a single lich do? Give it up. The devil spoke in a tone akin to whispering. It was similar to some kind of temptation, but Bei Sungmin answered calmly. I too have no idea what I am capable of. He had memories, but they weren't accurate. Even if he conjured up his memories, they would only be boring. That was because he had lost all emotions as he had become a lich. The memory of the living enemy couldn't affect him in any way, and so he ignored them. He wasn't certain of what or how much he could do. However, it was strange. Only one doubt continuously showed its face in his head. What am I searching for? What do I have to find? The one buried memory he had. However, he didn't know what it was. Bei Sungmin thought he would have to search for that something forever. But one sure thing is that you can't stop me. Thump. Bei Sungmin clasped his hands. He placed a divine blessing on him. Shalalala. An increasing sound of singing from somewhere. As if they were bewitched, the high-level devils lost their focus and drooled. After a while, a light formed above Bei Sungmin's head. The light gathered and formed into a circular disc shaped like an egg and encircled him. The power of a saint. Swish. Flush. Soon the particles of light brightened till they exploded outward. Although the radius was not wide, the devils within it were instantly reduced to ashes. See you up. Bei Sungmin opened his mouth wide. Then the ashes of the devils got sucked into his mouth. These devils' memories. Whoever they killed and fought. As expected of devils, they were evil. Bei Sungmin was an undead that could grow infinitely from light and darkness. Also, now that he'd inhaled the ashes of the devils, he gained their memories and power. Although it was completely insignificant compared to eating crystallization. It's not what I wanted. They weren't the memories and power Bei Sungmin wanted. Will I be able to know if I covet more evil? As if he was put on a spell, Bei Sungmin moved and began to hunt the devils. But Count Argong fell. His entire body was frozen solid, and within the ice he had turned to ashes. Wind crystallization has been acquired. 5 consecutive times. He'd gained a crystallization every time he killed nobles. Muyang immediately picked up the crystallization and swallowed it. Then his whole body wriggled and changed once again. Wind crystallization has been ingested. Squall's cruelty skill has been acquired. This wasn't bad either. However, it was hard to be happy for long. Thump. In the distance the time had stopped. The battle between the great chieftain and Bastro was at the level of a miracle, but like Muyang's disposal of Count Argong, an outcome was produced. And the winner was the great chieftain. Bastro, you're Horus's breed. Do you think Horus will protect you? Horus was a demon god's name. And the last remaining body was the main body. The great chieftain seized its neck. However, Bastro didn't lose his smile. He is evil itself. It's not a name someone like you could even speak of. You may not remember me, but I remember you. The one who married Horus's daughter, the king's son-in-law, Bastro. The great chieftain pointed to his own forehead. The only wound left on him. He was the Fire Tar's living legend, but somehow only that wound was still visible. I was a performer caught by Horus. My entire body was mutilated and I crawled like a dog. Blame yourself for following him. Bastro did not respond. Instead, he only gave a creepy smile. Then the great chieftain took him by the head and legs and tore him apart. Puck. Bastro's entire body stretched like rubber and his internal organs poured out as he died. After a while, little by little, the intestines that had been scattered on the ground began to turn into ashes. The great chieftain, who confirmed that they had become ashes, turned his body. He had also suffered numerous injuries while dealing with Bastro. One ear was cut off and his skin was scratched to such a degree that his right cheekbone was visible. But the great chieftain was the victor. The great chieftain killed the enemy's leader. Bastro died. The great chieftain raised one hand. It was a sign of victory. Look, it was that moment. The great chieftain frowned. Then he bent his head and saw the stab wound that had penetrated his heart. Wasn't it the virtue of the Fire Tars to remain vigilant until the end? Haruka the clown. Bastro was not dead. It wasn't only that he hadn't died, his appearance had changed again. A gigantic bizarre creature with 4 legs and 6 tails. It had no fur. Instead, it was as large as a fire tar and covered in blazing black flames. Why do you think I was chosen as the king's son-in-law? I who isn't even a demon king. Poof. Bastro's tail slipped out of Great Chieftain Haruka's body. You bastard. The Great Chieftain Haruka's eyes drooped. But he couldn't speak anymore. Thump. As he collapsed, all the movements on the battlefield stopped. As if it were agreed upon. Even Muyang, who was watching from a distance, frowned. However, the change in Bastro's appearance was extremely ominous. That was the real main body which appeared when the 7 bodies were crushed. The 7 grains were all gathered in one place. If it's like this, I can't win. However, it wasn't that there was no way at all. Muyang took out one talisman. Twok. As he tore the talisman, a phrase appeared. Bastro. That jerk wasn't the only devil. Sword One had also become a devil. He who was among the top 10 humans, he stared at Muyang as soon as he appeared. Muyang drew anguish and said briefly, "You will have to take the lead, Sword One." At that moment, Sword One's sword was covered with black-colored energy. Although Muyang lost some agility and lost the effect of the Lunatic Sovereign set's effect of an increase in all stats by 5, the use of Sword One was greater than he expected. The energy that could be felt by Bastro, who stood right in front of him, exceeded that of the great chieftains. Bastro also didn't lack compared to Sword One. If he could just hunt him, Muyang was certain to receive a reward greater than what he sacrificed. The work of killing tens of thousands of devils and getting rid of all the nobles, including Bastro. It wouldn't be just a half-decent reward. I will kill you all. Bastro was truly going berserk. As if all restrictions had been released, he didn't differentiate between friend or foe. For someone who wasn't even a demon king to marry a demon god's daughter. He felt like he could understand the reason why. Incomplete strength. Although it was a form created by combining all 7 clones into a main body, it was incomplete. For some reason, his form was extremely unstable. It was because the 7 grains didn't combine properly. Even so, he was exhibiting that much Herculean strength. An authority even the demon kings and demon gods would have their eyes on. However, no one could stop that obstinacy. Other fire tars were also in chaos. Especially Ogre. He stood still like a hardened statue. Is my opponent that monster? Sword One spoke as he raised his sword and pointed towards Bastro. Maybe because he had the tendency of a devil, unlike normal undead. His way of talking was extremely cold. It was definitely a different tendency compared to other undead. Sword 2 and Sword 3 approached near Sword 1, one after the other. These 3 people were labeled by the name Sword. When the 3 were gathered, an additional effect was received. The 3 swords resonated and spread out in a triangular form. Sword 1 stood at the front and looked at Muyang. Muyang spoke slowly. Work together with the other sword bones and kill him. I understood. If it isn't the sword's source, I will not lose. The sword's source. Seemed like he was talking about Kingslayer. Although Sword 1 became a devil, he remembered his fight against Kingslayer. Even how greatly he lost. Since it was sad to even call it a fight. Maybe because of this reason, Sword 1 treated Kingslayer as the sword's source. However, that was because Kingslayer was such an unconventional being. The Masters of the Darkness. Although he didn't know them well, didn't even the great magician Merlin think highly of them? So, unless it was that sort of unconventional being, Sword 1 wouldn't be easily defeated. When people say top 10 strongest humans, they are talking about the ones who can fight equally against even a demon king. There are quite a few who could be within the top 10 humans. But they can't all fight against a demon king. Demon king. The end of all authorities. Only those who could face them had strongest added to their title. Now the meaning slightly changed and was now called the top 10 humans, but in reality the original meaning was the 10 heroes who could face against a demon king. Either way, it meant that the top 10 humans were that much of a master at figuring out the demon king's authorities. All those who were among the top 10 humans got stronger by having pure skills as their foundation. Even if the meaning had changed, Only those who passed the minimum requirements were called the top 10. Purity is used as the base for true strength to figure out authority. And Sword 1 only got stronger by practicing his sword. That's why he was the best opponent for Bastro. If the great chieftain had fallen, in reality only Sword 1 could face Bastro. But Muyang wasn't planning to just sit aside. Bei Sungmin. A black circle appeared on the floor and out of it, Bei Sungmin soared up. Bei Sungmin lowered his head as he popped a devil's heart he was holding with his hand. Did you call? Place a saint's blessing on me. It will harm your body. I don't recommend it. A saint's blessing was a strong light-type skill. On the other hand, Muyang was filled with powers of the darkness. And Azura and Gremari's anguish. There was not one thing that would make you think of light. If he was to receive a blessing, it was definitely possible to expect for the power to reject Muyang, possibly harming him. But I still need to. The progress of the battle had turned once again. It was because all the fire tars were swept with shock with the great chieftain's fall. If the tide didn't change soon, a loss was crystal clear. It would be the same if Sword 1 killed Bastro. Since during the time of their fight, other allies would drop like flies. Muyang spoke again. 10 minutes is enough. I can withstand that much. Bei Sungmin closed his eyes. If it was some other undead, he would have acted without question, but Bei Sungmin was reborn as a lich through authority of death. For instance, the guardian of the territory Baltan was all about protecting the humans. Unlike other undead, they had inherent goals. Muyang thought the reason why he asked for Muyang's opinion might be because of these distinct characteristics. A moment later, Bei Sungmin, who opened his eyes, nodded his head. I understand. At the same time he held Muyang's hand. And then from Bei Sungmin's hand, a sentence of light was written and started to place an energy of blessing. Blaze. Saint's blessing has been placed. 10 minutes was enough. 10 minutes for Muyang was longer than for others. Muyang started to move not long after the sword bone trio left. His horns sprouted and the world started to become slower. Ogre couldn't believe the scene in front of his eyes. The great chieftain. He had fallen. He might have even died. The living legend of the fire tars and Ogre's idol. Ogre was who he was now, all thanks to the great chieftain. Normally the fire tars were stubborn. They hated change and had strong tendency to be satisfied with their current situation. On the other hand, Ogre didn't fear challenges. Even if he failed, he just laughed it off. That nature didn't just get created all of a sudden. It was only possible because he grew under the great chieftain. The great chieftain taught things about freedom and also stressed responsibilities and duties. He continuously stressed for Ogre to not be prejudiced and be on guard about becoming arrogant after taking power. He fulfilled the role of a good father and a strict teacher at the same time. But he, who Ogre didn't think would ever fall, was currently lying down on the ground. The world stopped and Ogre couldn't hear anything. Are you going to stop because of a tragedy? If you are, then I'm disappointed. Muyang spoke. With just that message behind, he ran into battle. Ogre wanted to stop fighting, but Muyang told him not to. Afterwards, his eyes bulged. He was so surprised by Muyang's actions in this battle. In a short time, he became the center of the battle as he received the gazes from every devil soldier. With the light's blessing, he showed overwhelming martial arts skills. It was unlike Muyang, but Ogre knew it was to show others. It was so. He was showing them. To the fire tars and to Ogre. As he didn't need to make a big deal like that. Is dominating the battle. Don't yield to mere devils. We have the much greater and whom. Ahum. We need to save the Lord. To the thick of the battle. Sheet, let's go. Small living creatures made a fuss over it. Muyang was using himself as bait to change the winds once more. No one knew if it would become a headwind or tailwind. At least to those small living creatures, it definitely worked to stir a strong typhoon. I need to move. The great chieftain had fallen. The only one left was the vice chieftain Ogre. If Ogre stood stupidly, other fire tars would lose their direction. Even the weak creatures tried their best to fight. The fire tars couldn't just stand by and watch. From now on, I'm the great chieftain. Now, when he confirmed the great chieftain's absence, Ogre needed to quickly rise to that position. So his role was to remove this chaos. The great chieftain always wanted it. The great chieftain raised Ogre with this free spirit for only one reason: to make a fire tar kingdom and not merely a fire tar tribe. Now it was time to move on to pursue his wishes. Sword 1's sword trapped space. Sword 1's sword ruled over laws. Bastro, who was chaos itself, was like a natural enemy. You who isn't even a human or a devil. Do you think you can win against me? A dog that's losing a fight tends to be loud. The 6 tails attached to Bastro shook the land. However, Sword 1's swordsmanship scuttled even the tail attacks. Although he didn't end it with Sword 1's endlessly pure swordsmanship, he had cut the tails with authority. Like a huge dominant mountain, Sword 1 moved forward with each step. Bastro could only be in a hurry. However, he couldn't withdraw either. He was confined in the area ruled by Sword 1. In this space, which was weaved together like a spider's web, all he could do was struggle entrapped. How long are you planning to confine me? The 6 tails stood up like a straight line. Thump. Like pillars, they struck the ground and produced a lot of black smoke. Afterwards, tons of circular objects started to pour out from the tail. Clash. Clash, clash, clash. Everything touched by the circular objects exploded. And nothing was left after the explosion. As if something had taken a bite, it disappeared cleanly. Due to the shockwaves, Sword 1 momentarily wobbled. The barrier created by Sword 2 and Sword 3 was broken. You are not a source. However, it still was an unstable, incomplete being. Someone that wasn't even a source couldn't win against purity just because it pretended to be so. Of course, Sword 1 also wasn't at that level, but he wouldn't lose to someone that wasn't a source. He wouldn't have been called one of the top 10 humans for no reason. Sword 1 organized his energy as he held his sword. At the same time, the sphere that flew from Bastro's tails clashed with his sword. Bang! With Ogre's awakening as the start, the battle turned around once again. There was no other word besides awakening to describe it. As if he never stopped, he moved his feet faster than anyone else. He killed without fearing death itself. And the fight ended. The moment when the evil soldiers were dominated, Bastro and Sword 1's fight had also ended. Slosh. Sword 1's sword sliced Bastro's body. The 6 tails had already been severed. As if the scene was showing how fierce the fight was, there was no land left in their surroundings. Only a thick smoke that settled around their battleground, and within it the two crazily fought each other. Kaya! A sound that rang people's ears. It was the sound that alerted the end of the battle. In time, Bastro started to turn into ashes and disappeared. Afterwards, Sword 1 approached Muyang with his one arm and one leg lost and wings ripped. He moved using his sword as a cane instead of his leg. I have completed my contract. Like the start, a completely emotionless expression. That short message was all he said. Sword 2, Sword 3, and Sword 1's forms slowly started to break down. Then they returned to their talisman form. The content of the contract was to merely kill Bastro, and since he had completed it, there was no reason for him to stay. Also, to recover his damaged body, he needed to return to his talisman form. Ting. Rumble. A black marble dropped to the ground as Sword 1 disappeared. He didn't need to think to know what it was. Bastro's crystallization. With a 6. All noble devils gave out crystallizations. As if it was destiny.